Alec Crowley, to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I sometimes ask myself the question in this Parliament, in this chamber, whether I'm in a chamber that is full of parliamentarians that are debating and discussing the big issues for their constituencies and their constituents, or whether this is a room full of political activists that are trying to put the case for their own political parties. And sadly, the level of debate today, I conclude, the latter. The fact is that there are major issues facing our communities and our constituents, and the focus of this debate should be on these big challenges and how we actually tackle them and how we move forward. The Scottish Government, on page 63 of the report, say the ambition for a socially just and more equal Scotland has been a central objective of this government since 2007. If that's the case, you would have to say that that has failed, because both the UK Government, the London Government and the Edinburgh Government have both presided over a rise in poverty and inequality. I tried to come in on Willie Rennie and Gavin Brown, because the point I was wanting to make was that, yes, we're seeing a growth in jobs, and any growth in jobs is welcomed, although the point when Mr Swinney took an intervention is that quite a lot of those jobs are low-paid jobs. We're seeing within the economy much more part-time work and many more people in self-employed, so the types of jobs is very important, and the Deputy First Minister acknowledged that. But the fact is that in terms of inequality and poverty, over this last number of years, we have seen food banks grow in communities the length and breadth of Scotland. In my own constituency, in Ballingarry, in Rosyth, in Inverkeithing, food parcel collection in Kelty, and tonight, when I leave this chamber, I'll be going to the opening of the food bank in the town of Cowdenbeath. So the levels of poverty and deprivation have been increasing, and whilst we should be celebrating jobs and doing more to create jobs and support people, we've got to acknowledge that there is real inequality in our communities. And I believe that the people of Scotland acknowledge that there is inequality and poverty, and the people of Scotland, regardless of their politics and regardless of whether they voted no or voted yes in the referendum, expect the politicians to focus on those big issues. Christina McKelvey takes great delight today in standing up and attacking South Lanarkshire Council. But the fact is, and it's acknowledged indeed by the Scottish Government, that the settlement for local government has been year on year a very difficult settlement, and there are authorities in Scotland who have a 17% and 25% cut taking place in their budgets. And actually, if you look around with some of these authorities, it's where there is a greater poverty and deprivation.
Mike McKenzie.
I actually agree with Mr Riley in terms of a lot of what he's saying. Would he agree with me then that we should forget the austerity policies and look towards the SNP policy of a 0.5% increase in a budget every year, and therefore be able to pass on perhaps some of that increase to councils and at least protect them from further cuts?
Alec Riley.
I would say to Mike McKenzie that regardless of who you blame for the global economic crash that took place, the fact is, in 2010, when Labour left government, we were coming out of recession, because unlike the current administration of Tories and Liberals down in London, who are actually believe the way to tackle this is to cut public expenditure and create greater problems, Labour was growing the economy. So there is a difference in approach. There was a difference in approach with the last Labour government, and there is a difference in approach with the party that I represent. But I would want to come back to this document, because I do believe that there are areas in terms of inequality and poverty. My surgeries over the weekend were some of the busiest surgeries that I've ever had since becoming an MSP. And the biggest difficulty that people were coming to me with was either a lack of housing or the fact that they were homeless and living with family, friends, etc. We do have a housing crisis. Over 180,000 people on council waiting lists in Scotland. The cost of buying an average house has rocketed from some £73,000 at the turn of the century to some £179,000 on average now, pricing so many people who are in work, who are earning, out of being able to go into that market. And we're actually at a stage where we're, in a manner reminiscent of the Victorian times, where at that time, building of public sector housing, before we had the building of public sector housing, there were as many poor households and smaller private rented sector than there was in the large public and social sector. Now, we've got to address that. Shelter, I'm always banging on about their 10,000 houses a year, but the fact is, it's reckoned that it will take some 60 years to claim the backlog. You then sit alongside that in terms of the jobs that can be created, in terms of the skills, the apprenticeships, and Fife have a programme right now for 2,700 houses being built, council houses, for rent over the 5-year period, and they have a great record working with the private sector. Their number is the apprenticeships that's there, but these companies are now saying to me that we are heading, in terms of the whole building sector, to a crisis in skills, where there is not, I mean, a company last week who could not recruit electricians. So at a time where we're not promoting the skills, we've got a skills shortage. So I would like to see a much more focused programme of housing. I did speak to the Cabinet Secretary after his budget and then welcomed the investment, because I will always welcome investment that's going into housing. I would simply say that we need more. But we've got to look at a new deal with local government and how we can work together. If you look at the Glasgow City deal, and I will conclude in a minute, but if you look at the Glasgow City deal, they have been able to mobilise £1.2 billion in the City deal for all the authorities in there, and are projected to create some 20,000 new jobs. So I would say, let's cut out in this place the party politicking for cheap points. Let's stand up for our constituencies and have a real vision for Scotland and tackle the issues that are impacting on our constituents every day. That's why they send us here. That's what we get paid for.
Thank you very much.